class, in today's video, I will be giving you a tutorial on how to build the NoteTaker app. As always, you can find all the information about the NoteTaker app here on our Canvas page, and here you can find all of the information about the NoteTaker app, including each of the screens broken down with their functionality, as well as the components that are needed to complete each screen and the app altogether, which include the local DB and the list viewer, which are our two new components. So let's take a look at what the completed app looks like. In the NoteTaker app, you have three different screens. This is the first screen, which is called the Notes List Viewer screen. On this screen, we have a label up here that has the title Notes written in it. In the middle here, you can't see, but there is a list viewer here that'll list the titles of all of the notes that will be in our local database, as well as a plus button where you can add a new note. And this takes you to the note taker screen, where you can type out a title for your note in this text input box and the body of your note in this text input box. And there are two buttons on the screen. One is the cancel button. The cancel button will not save the note and take you back to the list viewer screen. And the done button will save your note to the database and take you back to the list viewer screen where you can see your note listed here. Then when you click on one of the notes that are in our list viewer, it'll take you to the third screen, which is the note viewer screen. And here you can see the title of your note and the body of it. And you can go back and see all of your notes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started building it. So I'm going to hop over to Thunkable and go ahead and create a new project. Okay, and you'll remember that our app has three different screens. So I'm going to start here with the first screen, which will be our notes list screen. This is where we'll see that's that first screen where we'll see all of our notes listed out in the list viewer. So this screen requires three components. The first is a label, which will have the title of our note, of our app. Then a list viewer below that, and a button that'll allow us to add a new note to our database. Just going to reorder these here. All right. So first, starting off with the title label, I'm going to rename it to title label, and I'm gonna give it the text notes. I went ahead and made the font size a bit bigger at 25, made the font weight bold, text aligned left, and the width 80% of our container, like that. Next, on the list viewer, you can go ahead and leave the list viewer with the default name. Doesn't necessarily matter because we only will have one list viewer in this app. But some of the other styling that I did for this is I made the height of the list viewer 70% of the screen. And I gave it some padding on the right and left. On the left, I gave it 10, and on the right, also 10, just so we get a little bit of space here on the edges. I also gave it some margin. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the padding on the left and right. And then I gave it margin on the top and bottom of 10 to give it some space between the label and the plus button. On the plus button, I go ahead and renamed that to plus button. You call it add button, whatever works for you. New note button, whatever makes sense. I gave its text a plus symbol and made the font size 40-point font, so it'd be nice and big. And the color that I've been using throughout this, app is this like orangey yellow color. And its hex code is F5A623. But I actually want that to be the text color And then I made the background color transparent so you couldn't see any color in the background. And I also went ahead and made the font bold. So that's what that screen looks like. Great. Now let's go ahead and design our second screen. Let's go ahead and add a new blank screen. And this is going to be the note taker, the actual note taker screen, where you'll be able to write out your notes. So I'm going to call it note taker screen. Great. And you'll remember on the note taker screen we have these two buttons and these two text input boxes. So I'm going to go ahead and grab out my two text input boxes first. All right. This top text input box is going to be the where you'll put the title. So I'm going to call it the title text input. And I gave this a height of 7% and a width of 80%, which is the default. Then I gave it some padding just so that the text wasn't right up against the edges of the box. So I gave it a padding left of 15, which it already had. And then I did some text styling on this as well. You can get that in the advanced and then go to text styles. I made the font size 22 and I made the font weight bold. And then lastly, here on the advanced side, I did some other styling here under the styling tab. I went ahead and removed the background color so it was just white. And then I also gave it a border all the way around of 1 pixel. And I made that border a light gray color. The color I used has the hex code E9E9E9. And that's just like this light gray color. So I'm going to make all of the edges that color. Great. And I also gave it a border radius of 3 on all sides, so it'd be just a little bit of a rounded box. So that's what that box looks like. And then I styled the second text input box pretty similarly, except for I just made it a little bit taller so you have more room to type out the content of your note. So I called it Note Input Box, and back over here on the simple stylings, I went ahead and gave it a height of 60%. And then I again left the width at 80. I gave it some margin on the top of 5 to give it some space. And I gave it some padding on the top and left of 15. Then over here on the advanced, I did a similar thing in the styling where I removed the background color, gave it a border width of 1 pixel all the way around, colored those borders with that same E9E9E9 hex code. And again, gave the borders all a radius of 3. And the last thing that's necessary for this notes input box is that I want the user to be able to write multiple lines of text. So if you scroll down here to the bottom, you'll see this true-false statement that says multi-line. I went ahead and made that true so the user could type multiple lines of text. And that's what it looks like so far. Great. And now all I need to add is those 2 buttons, the cancel and the done button. So I'm going to add in 1 button here. Great. I'm going to make this our cancel button, so I'm going to rename it cancel. And then in the text, I did a left pointing caret and the word cancel. I made the text color that same orangey yellowish color, which was F5A623. and took the background color away. And I made the font size 18. And then in order to get it to be positioned in that top left corner, I went over to the advanced section, went to positioning, and here I used absolute positioning. You'll notice that once I hit absolute, it goes on top of everything right in the middle of the screen. That means it's no longer being positioned relative to the other components on our screen. It's being positioned all on its own. And that's what we want in order to get it up in the top left-hand corner so it doesn't affect any of the other components on our screen when we try to move it. And I went ahead and if you scroll down a bit here, you can go ahead and hit these offsets. This will tell you how far away from the top, bottom, left, or right the button will be positioned. So I want it 15 pixels from the top and 15 pixels from the left. And that'll just put it right up there in the top corner. Great. Now the other button, the done button, is pretty similar to the cancel button in terms of styling. So I'm actually just going to copy the cancel button by clicking this little duplicate button here. And that'll give me a second one, which you can't see super well because it's they're right on top of each other. But I'll just rename it to be the done button. And then back in that positioning screen, instead of giving it, I still want to keep the top 15 so it's at the same height as the other button, but instead of the left 15, I'm going to give it right 15 so it's on the other side of the screen. And then I can go ahead and rename it to say done. So now I have a screen that looks like that. Great. And now our last screen is going to be the screen where we're going to display each of the notes once we click on them in the list viewer. So I called this the note display screen. Great. And this screen has just a back button here and then the title label and a notes label where we can see what our notes were. So I need two labels on this screen. The top label is where we're going to display the title of our note, so I'm going to rename that to be title display label, because that's where we're going to display it. I can't name it just title label because we already had a title label on the other screen where we put like the title notes. So I made it title display label. I styled it pretty similar to how I did the text input box on the first screen. So I gave it a font size of 22. I made that font weight bold. I gave it a width of 80% and made sure that the text align was left. And that was that. And then for the label where we'll display the body of the note, the content of the note, I went and called that note display label. And I went ahead and kept the font size at 18, left its font weight the way it was. I gave it a height of 70%. And a width of 80%. And then I gave it a little bit of padding. Or no, I didn't. I left it the way it was. And that was all the styling on that one. Great. Lastly, I need this back button. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the button out. And we're going to style this really similarly to how we did the other two buttons on the other screens. So I did back. I gave it that same orangey yellow text color. Made the background color transparent. Left the font size at 18. And then I did that same absolute positioning over here in the advanced. Went to positioning, made it absolute. And then gave it a top 15 and left 15. Now you can see it looks like that. I'm actually going to give a little bit of margin between the two of these labels so they're not right on top of each other. So I'll go ahead and give this notes display label some margin on the top, maybe 10. And maybe a little bit more, 15. That looks good. Now we have some space. Great. Last thing I'm going to do on these two is I'm just going to remove the text from them so they're blank. Great, so that's it for all of the visible components on our 3 screens. The last thing that we need is the most important thing, which is our local database. So we can find that here in our components, under data, grab a local database and drag that in. And it doesn't matter which screen you add it to because the local database will be accessible on all 3 screens, so it doesn't matter what screen it is you're on when you add it. Great, so let's go ahead and set up our data table by clicking on Click to Edit a Data Table here. And for this app, we do need 2 different columns. We need one column where we'll keep all of the titles of our notes, and one column where we'll put all the contents of our notes. So I'll call my two columns titles and notes. And I'm going to remove all of these default rows. Great. So that's everything on the designer side of things. So let's go ahead and start building out our blocks. And the first screen that I want to start with is actually the note taker screen, because this is where we're going to start storing things into our database. So let's go ahead and hop over here to our blocks and get started building that. So the first thing that I want to do is save what our user types into the 2 text input boxes into our database into the correct columns. And that's all going to happen whenever they click on the Done button. So I'm going to go over here to the Done button and get out the donebutton.click event handler. And I want to add a new row to my local database so that I can store a piece of data in the titles column and a piece of data in the notes column. So I'm going to grab this local database's add row block and snap that in. And the place where I'm going to find the value for the titles and the notes columns are in those text input boxes where the user entered that information. So I'm going to go over here to the title input box and get its text property, and that'll be the title value. And then similarly for the notes, I'm going to get the notes text input text, and that will be the notes value. Awesome. So now we're saving the user's note into our database. The other thing we want to do when they click the Done button is navigate them back to the list viewer screen so they can then go ahead and look at all their notes. So over here in the blocks, I'm going to go to the control and hit navigate to notes list screen. Similarly, we also want to navigate to the notes list screen when they click on the cancel button. So I'm going to go to the cancel button and also put a navigate to notes list screen there. Great. So now on the note taker screen, our user can type their note with a title and the note and the content of the note here in the text input boxes. And then we're going to save those 2 values into our database in a new row and then take them back to the notes list screen so they can look at all the notes in our database. Great. So once they go back to the notes list screen, this is where we want to display all of our notes in the database in our list viewer so our user can click on them and see them. So let's go ahead and start building that out. So here on the notes list screen blocks, I want to go ahead and set up my list viewer as soon as this screen opens. So I can go to the notes list screen here and click on when notes list screen opens. And this is when I want to set the value of the text items in my list viewer. This is going to be this part of the list viewer, the thing that the user is going to see in the list viewer. And what I want them to see is the title of all of the notes in our database. And in order to get the title of all of the notes in our database, I need to get every item that's in the titles column of our database. And I can do that by going to the local DB and hitting get column. And the column that I want to get is the titles column. Great. So now when our user opens up this screen, we're going to set the list viewer's text items to be all of the titles that are in our database. Let's go ahead and look and see to make sure that works. So I'm going to type a note here that says hello, and the content will be hello world. Hit done. And now we see hello pop up in our list viewer. Great. Next, we want to define what will happen when our user clicks on one of the notes that are in the list viewer. We want to show them that note in the display screen. So you can get this event handler from the list viewer screen that says list viewer when items clicked. And you'll recall from the Profiles app that this event handler is a bit special because it has two different items here for us, two different variables. The first variable is the item that the user clicked on. So in my last example, it would have been like hello. And the second thing here is the index. So that will tell us what numbered row in our database the user clicked on. So if they clicked on the note that we just added, it would be in row 1, the index would be 1. If they clicked on the third item in the list viewer, it would be the third item in the index of the list viewer, which means it would be the third row in the database. Because our database rows and the index of our list viewer line up because we're using the database to define the text items in our list viewer. So in order to retrieve this information, we have to use a local database get cell. And this will allow us to get one particular cell from our database. So in order to retrieve the title that they clicked on, we want to get a cell from the local database that's in the titles column, and it's going to be at the index that the user clicked on. And then for the note, it's going to be, we're going to get a cell, but instead of being in the title screen or in the titles column, it'll be in the notes column, but at the same index, the same row. In order to use these blocks, I need to set it to something. So I'm actually going to create two app variables that will be where I'm going to hold the name of the title and note that the user selected. And actually I'm going to do that over here on the notes screen. So I'm going to get out create a new app variable called title, and I'm going to initialize it to be an empty piece of text. And then do the same here, but I'm going to call this note. So this is going to represent the title and content of the note that the user selects in the list viewer. So then back over here on the notes list screen, I'm going to go ahead and set the title variable to the local database get cell in column titles at the index the user selected. And then I'm going to set the variable note to call the local database's get cell in the column notes at that same index. Great. Then once all of that is over, once we've set all of our information from our database, we want to navigate our user over to the note display screen, over to this screen, so that they can see the content of the note that they clicked on. So I'm going to go over here to the control and get a navigate to note display screen. Great. Now the last thing on this notes list screen is this other button, the plus button. When the user clicks on the plus button, that's when they want to add a new note to our database. And they do that over here in the note taker screen. So when the user clicks on the plus button, we're going to navigate them to the note taker screen. All right, that's everything for the notes list screen. Now we are on to the last screen of the app. So in the note display screen, this is where we're going to display the note that our user selected. And this is very simple because we've already gotten all that information for our database. And the information about the note that they selected, its title and its content, are already sitting here in our variable. So all we have to do is display it in our labels. So we want that to happen as soon as the screen opens. So we can go to when note display screen opens. And we're going to set the title display labels text to the variable title. We're going to set the note display labels text to the variable note. Lastly, on this screen, we have a back button up here that will navigate the user back to the notes list screen. So we'll say when, I didn't rename this button, when the back button is clicked, we will navigate the user to the notes list screen. Great. Let's go ahead and give this a test. So I'm going to click on the plus button. Great, I get navigated to the note taker screen. I can go ahead and type my note out here. And when I hit done, you can see that my note got saved to the database and then also added to the list viewer. And you can see that displayed here. And I can keep adding notes if I'd like. And hit done, and it'll add the next note. When I click on the plus, I can also click cancel to go back to the screen and not save a note. And then lastly, whenever I click on one of these notes in the list viewer, like I click on hello, the title and content of the note that I selected gets retrieved from the database and saved into those local app variables of title and notes. And then I get navigated to the note display screen, and using that local title and note app variable, I can display the title and the note content in the appropriate label. And I hit back, and I can go back to the list screen. And that's the Notes app. That's the Note Taker app. As always, you can turn in this app on Canvas by going back to your Thunkable account and clicking on the 3 dots, the project details page. And here you can see a preview of what your app looks like. You can click on the URL here, copy it, and then on Canvas, hit Start Assignment and paste that URL into the website URL text box and hit Submit. And that's the Note Taker app. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.